I want you to imagine a glass of water. It's one of the most basic needs in life. For many of you, I assume that all it takes to acquire this item is grabbing a cup and filling it up at the fridge or the sink. But what if it wasn't this simple? What if this water was making you sick? What if you were having headaches, stomach aches, and throwing up, all from something you ingested every day? Well, this is exactly what happened in Flint, Michigan. In Flint, in 2012, a change in the water system caused the lead pipes to deteriorate and contaminate the water system. Now, many of you may have heard of this incident as it became known nationwide, in part because of who it impacted. You see, the city of Flint has around 40% of its citizens living below the poverty line, compared to just the 12% in the entire US. And this water wasn't only making them sick. Lead poisoning has also been shown to hinder behavioral and cognitive development of children it impacts. So now I want you to meet Jalen Wakes. When he was 6 years old, it was revealed that the water he'd been drinking and bathing in for over the past year had been contaminated with lead. Since his exposure, he's racked up over 30 school suspensions. You may be thinking there could be countless other reasons for his behavior. However, Jalen isn't alone. From changes in behavior to ability to learn, the children of the Flint water crisis are showing the impacts years later. I mean, just look at the percentage of children in Flint who need special education. It's nearly doubled since the incident. Now, it should be noted that Flint isn't a unique incident, and there are places all over the country where this disparity in water quality has emerged. And a big part of this is water infrastructure. You see, water infrastructure varies across the United States, and many communities rely on poor water systems that produce contaminated water. And including border colonies and minority communities in rural areas. However, this happens in cities too. And while it impacts everyone in these cities, those that are most impacted are those living under the poverty line. For instance, in 2002 in Washington, D.C., lead leached from the aging lead service pipes after a chemical change in the water treatment process. Now, this is very important because it's low-income homes that are more likely to have these lead service lines, putting them at higher risk for lead exposure when this occurs. Now, back to present day. Let's take a look at Jackson, Mississippi. Just last August, the city was left without running water after flooding of the primary water treatment plant. And while this made national news, the residents of Jackson, of which a notable 26% of live below the poverty line, had experienced this before. In recent years, they've experienced boil advisories and other disruptions due to their aging infrastructure. I mean, just last winter, they were once again left without running water after multiple water mains burst throughout the city. They've even been warned about lead levels, among countless other issues. Now, this system has been in desperate need of updates for years, with some parts being over a century old. And while the city attempted to update the system in 2013, failures only led to more issues. Today, the residents of Jackson continue to deal with the drawbacks of outdated infrastructure, putting them at higher risk for water contamination when it occurs. So now I would like to show you not only an example of outdated infrastructure, but also pollution. In 2000, in Martin County, Kentucky, millions of gallons of coal slurry, or liquid coal waste, found its way into the water after its impoundment collapsed. This sludge contained high levels of industrial pollutants and heavy metals. And even after it was cleaned up, tests found that the water contained high levels of toxic chemicals, although the EPA had claimed that it was safe. Now, this only strained an already struggling water system. And the contamination of private wells led to an increased need for water, and with it, a need to expand the water system. In the years after this incident, citizens received chemical advisories warning of the possible health effects of their exposure, including what was called problems with the central nervous system. Now today, officials claim that the water is now safe. However, this came at a high price. Since the incident, water prices have skyrocketed, and despite many residents' refusal to drink their tap water, they still struggle to pay the water bills. Now, these are only a fraction of the cases of water insecurity in low-income areas, and there are countless other pollutants that can impact people living in poverty. Also, aside from this area's issues with water pollution, a high percentage of them also live under the poverty line. Around a third of the population of Martin County lives in poverty, compared to just the 15% in the entire state of Kentucky. Now, I want you to think back to this glass of water. What would you do if you didn't have access to clean water? Maybe you buy a water filter for your house, or you simply drink from plastic water bottles. Well, these solutions are expensive, and while many of you can afford these things, many people living in poverty can't, meaning that not everyone can protect themselves the same from the threat of polluted water. Now, developmental neurotoxins are chemicals that can impair neurological development in the prenatal period and throughout childhood. And these chemicals often enter drinking water through unprotected delivery methods, such as damaged pipes, a common occurrence in outdated water systems. So if children are more likely to be exposed to these development-impairing pollutants, then what does their development look like? Well, they're falling behind. And one place that demonstrates this gap is gray matter. See, gray matter is the outermost layer of the brain, and it's very important for information processing and behavior. This graph shows the varying levels of gray matter volume throughout the first years of life based on varying socioeconomic status, or SES. Now, it should be noted that this disparity isn't present at the beginning of life. However, it emerges as children spend more time in their environments. Now, aside from gray matter, these children also display atypical structural development in places such as the hippocampus, the frontal lobe, and the temporal lobe. So these disparities have been thoroughly studied, with many researchers looking at the emotional environment and access to educational resources. But I believe that there may be another factor, the environment. You see, countless studies have shown that people living in poverty are more likely to be exposed to environmental hazards, many of which have development-impairing properties. So why have researchers not looked at the role of the environment in this issue? By no means am I claiming that the environment is the sole cause of this developmental disparity that we see in children today. However, I believe that the possibility of its role suggests that it has much larger impacts than previously thought. Today, I've mostly talked about water, but it goes much further than this. People living in poverty are more likely to live next to existing environmental hazards, such as landfills, and be more affected by air pollution, which, just like water contamination, can impair neurological development. Now you may be wondering what this has to do with you. Well, you're all part of the system that makes up society. So whether you live amongst the mountains in Martin County or you're just a student here at Episcopal, you have more of an impact on the environment than you think. So whether you're driving to school or just simply throwing away your lunch, you're having a direct impact on your environment. So while we may not be able to ensure developmental equality or universal access to clean water, we can control our individual impacts on the environment. I think we can all agree that everyone deserves an equal shot at life. I mean, just imagine the places we could go if everyone in our society reached their full potential. Children can't control the situations that they're born into. And if they're born into poverty, they're more likely to face developmental disparities, which puts them at higher risk for living in poverty as an adult. So even if the effects aren't as clear as this glass of water, it's true that we don't just affect the environment, but the environment affects us. Thank you.